Good evening, church. We'll get started with some announcements here and open up in prayer. Water Day is this Friday from 12 to 8 p.m. It says we'll eat around 5, so keep that in mind. Please say a prayer for David and Julia Snell. Although David is asymptomatic, he tested positive for COVID and Julia is coughing. Austin and Ashley Hunt are the proud parents of Oakley Rhett, born yesterday, 8 pounds, 10 ounces, says 20 3/4 inches long. Baby and mama are doing well. Howard McFadden had surgery today in Louisville and will be in the hospital a few days, so please keep him in prayer. Calvin Baldwin had additional surgery on his left foot in an attempt to restore blood flow. If this is unsuccessful, he will need further surgery. And our last announcement, Howard Mead will have another echocardiogram on August 8th. So please keep these in prayer. Also, please check Realm for any further announcements or updates. And if you will, we'll get open with prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time we get to spend together at the middle of the week. We ask, Father, for your wisdom and understanding tonight as the lesson is brought to us. Please keep our minds open and focused on you, both tonight and as we leave here to spread your message the rest of this week. We ask these things in your name, Father. Amen.
If the skies above you are gray, you are feeling so blue. If your cares and burdens seem gray all the whole day through, there's a silver lining that shines in the heavenly land. Look by faith and see, my friend, trust in his promises, friend. Sing, be happy, press on to the goal, trust in who leads you, he will keep your soul. Let all be faithful, look to him and pray. Lift your voice and praise his song, sing, be happy today. Oft we fail to see the rainbow up in heaven's fair sky, when it seems the fortunes of earth bound to pass us by. There are things we know that are worth more than silver and gold. If we hope and trust in each day, we shall have pleasure untold. Sing and be happy, press on to the goal. Trust in who leads you, he will keep your soul. Let all be faithful, look to him and pray. Lift your voice and praise his song, sing, be happy today.
I want you to think about a time in your life when you went through a really rough medical situation. Maybe you had a car accident and you had to deal with some things. Maybe you were driving crazy with a four-wheeler and broke your foot. Maybe you were a person who had COVID and you had a really bad time with it. Whatever it might have been, just remember that time. What did it feel like? What were you thinking about? Now let me tell you about someone and what they were thinking about. Calvin Baldwin had surgery this morning. As you know, he's having his complications from diabetes. He had another surgery this afternoon. I just came from there. He had just gotten to the room. He's doing well. Here's what he was thinking about. Between the two surgeries, he called Orrin to ask how Marge was doing. Now you think about that for a minute. Did you come out of surgery and think about calling somebody to see how they were doing? Have you been so sick you couldn't hardly stand up in your house, sitting on the couch just to keep from being dizzy? Oh, but you were thinking about this person and that person, and you're calling them or texting them. I don't know how many people actually do that. Calvin and Donna did it. I wonder, is that one of the keys to handling very difficult times? Meaning, when we go through difficult times, is one of the keys not just thinking about me? Maybe it's freeing up my mind from my problems to be concerned about what somebody else is going through. I don't know. But I think that's extremely impressive. And I think that's the kind of thing that every one of us can learn from, and we can be inspired by it. And then I think about what the Hebrew writer said, encourage one another daily while it is still today. Maybe that's what they were thinking. I'm going to be out again for another surgery, and I might not be awake after it. So today, while I have an opportunity, I'm going to check on one of my brethren. Let us be people who are so concerned and thoughtful about those in need, and especially, as Galatians 6:10 says, those who are of the household of faith, that we keep them in our minds, and whatever opportunities we have to check on them, that we do so. Well, this is one of those opportunities. We're checking on each other spiritually. Tonight, are you where you need to be? Are you the person you need to be? Can this group help you in some way with your spiritual situation? We offer this time every week for you to express that need if you need it. As our shepherds meet here at the front, let's stand together.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. Sing the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the
Chris, you got me here. Everybody who's staying in here, I'm going to introduce our speaker for the night, our teacher. And I'm going to call him the inimitable Charles Parsons. But I got to introduce him this way. 20 plus years ago, I don't remember, he might. Every Friday afternoon, we would go visiting. And we would start eating lunch together. Well, this particular Friday, you know where Brady's is over here, right? Next to Goodyear. Well, it used to be another one of those Chinese restaurants. So we started out there. And we're sitting there eating lunch together. And while we're sitting there, the health department showed up to do their inspection. And while we're sitting there, the health department locked the door and shut them down. Charlie, huh? But Charlie looked at me and he said, "We've already started. Let's finish. If it's going to get us, it would have already gotten us." That's why he is the inimitable. You can look that up. Charlie Parsons.
I don't know. Jack, look up and down. Title of the lesson tonight is "He is my rock, my stress, my relief in stress and worry." He shouldn't be our stress. He should be our relief. I think Mike kind of stole the thunder by talking about Calvin, how perfectly someone can deal with something like stress. Chris, can you turn me down, or do I need to move the mic? Okay. This series on Wednesday night this quarter has been from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And when I was assigned my lesson first, it was supposed to be a month or so ago. Mike had somebody else take my place. I don't know. I guess he thought I wasn't ready. So I've worried about this ever since. He switched topics. Now I've been worrying about this. Some of the related topics that we've already covered this quarter, there's a lot of overlap. Doubt and insecurity, that would relate to stress and worry. Peer pressure, grief, fear certainly does. We worry about things that we're afraid of. We may worry about things that tempt us. Let me ask you, what is your number one source of stress and worry? If I just ask for ideas, what bothers, what comes to your mind would be your number one concern of stress and worry? Dwight? Health? Health. We got health. Who else votes for health as number one? It's a quiet crowd tonight. Okay. Joe? Joe agrees with Dwight. Health. Somebody else? Family. That's a pretty broad term. Anything more specific than that? Our kids, our grandkids. Bruce? Co-workers. Okay.
What's happening in our nation?
Current events. Finances. Lots involved in that. Who else? Okay. So your number one source of stress and worry, I think family and health is what I'm getting. Chris is in the crow's nest up there. He and I did a survey. 10,338 people were asked this same question. What's your number one source of stress and worry? So this group, it would be health and family. So we tried to figure what this was going to be, and Karnak there, for those of you the younger generation, you've got to go back and look at some of the YouTube videos of Johnny Carson, Ed McMahon doing Karnak the Magnificent. Back when comedy was clean, even on late night. Chris, what's the survey say? Number one, source of stress and worry. Health and family. You guys are good. Ooh. Okay. What was number two? What would a consensus of what number two would be? Job might go with finances. Okay. Jobs, finances, anybody got something that'll top that for number two? Okay, Chris, they say jobs, finances is the number two concern, at least of this group here, at least of the ones who are willing to speak. Jobs and finances. You guys are on a roll. I'm going to go ahead and take Jack's for number three since I can't get any other input. Current events, state that our country's in, the strife that have been experiencing for these last few years. So, Chris, what's the survey say for number three, source of current events? Does anybody get a sense this was a rigged survey? Chris, the gig's up. It really wasn't 10,338. It was 63. Randy, how close was I? The list of things that we're concerned about can vary from time to time, and what's on top of everybody's mind this week may be different next week or next month. Just threw up a bunch of things there. That if someone in your family has COVID, probably health and COVID would be your number one concern right now. If someone lost a job, finances might be the number one. If you had a child in the military and things were heating up in the area where they were, you'd be concerned about that. COVID, we've been through the original COVID, Delta, Omicron, we're up to BA5 now. I think the next one's the B52s. Future names have already been reserved for other variants that are coming. And I'm sure you've heard the news recently. They're saying it's probably going to be with us forever. It's probably going to keep going through different variations and hopefully get weaker and weaker as it does. So maybe in a few years it'll be like the common cold and people won't have a serious side effects from it. To me, the glorious internet is a source of a lot of stress and worry on some things. Beware of spam and unsolicited telephone calls. If you can't read there, these are things that I got off my email that come all the time. That Mike McAfee guy keeps sending me these McAfee, my virus protection is running out. He swears he's not doing that, but doesn't that say McAfee on the left? McAfee, Norton, you click on there, they just want your email, date of birth, social security number, credit card number, and they'll fix you right up. If you watch a lot of TV like I'm prone to do, as one of the virus companies says, PCmatic, says most of these antivirus programs are made overseas. As a matter of fact, a lot of them are made in the countries that some of the viruses and malware come from those same countries. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? If you get one of these that says your account's been placed on hold, your account's been closed, you've been charged, everybody had those calls? Your account's been charged $999 for a new iPhone. Oh, I didn't order that. And a new microphone. If you don't know how to read those emails, and that's not big enough print there to see, if you can't tell where the email address comes from, send those things straight to spam. Just saw today, did you see this? That out-of-control Chinese rocket? It may land on your head on Sunday. They don't know where it's coming down. They think it's going to come down on Sunday. Who's worried about that?
I didn't know about it until you told me.
That's why I did that, so you would have some concerns. You know, if you happen to be on that speck where that thing comes down, there's going to be some parts in there that will come right through the roof. I'm not worried. There's not a thing we can do about that, is there? My grandsons are really interested in natural disasters, volcanoes, tornadoes. I thought I had a tsunami there. I missed that. The murder hornets. You know, they've lost their profile. And everybody familiar with them? Look how big that rascal is. Come from Asia somewhere, and they kill regular honeybees and bite their heads off, and terrible. I'm sure you've seen pictures like this, the videos of shark in the water right next to the swimmers on the internet all the time. Oops. Guess it can come get you. There's a golf course. Is that in Florida or South Carolina? The huge alligator they have video of coming right across the fairway, lumbering over, going back into the water on the other side. Mike, would you hold up just for a minute before you hit your second shot? Mike would hold up. I'm sorry those snakes don't show up better than that. I like the cobra there in the center on the bottom. Mike up there's in the snake, so he would say those are all, keep your distance, but he would respect them. I would respect them and shoot them and chop them into pieces. Spiders, who's afraid of spiders? Who worries about spiders? You know, I tried to pick the ugliest one and the cutest one, but then when I put them together, it's like, which one is which? You know, and out of this, there were like 50 pictures of spiders, plain ones and all kinds of colorful ones. You know, dogs kill more people in the U.S. than sharks, snakes, spiders. So sometimes we have misplaced worries, misplaced concerns. Wars, that's some Ukrainian refugees there. I'm sure if you've had the TV on in the last 6 months, you've seen all the stuff that's going on there. My slide's almost off. We could just say, don't worry about anything. We can't do anything about anything anyway, right? Who has that attitude? Just, there's no reason to worry about anything. Does anybody feel that laid back, that they don't worry about any single thing? If you're worried about something, pray about it. Leave it in higher hands. If you're in my generation, Alfred E. Newman's the epitome of what? Me worry? Next generation was don't worry, be happy. I don't know, what would be the current one? Is there a new one that would take the place of that now? Some of you have probably seen this before, and it talks about kinds of things we should worry about. There are things in the world that matter, and there are things that we can control. Where that overlaps, you'll see there, those are the things we should focus on. There are lots of things in the world that matter that we have no control over. That Chinese rocket, when it comes down, it's going to come down. We can't tell about the person coming the other way on the interstate. You saw or 3 people killed. Was that yesterday? Early yesterday morning, down by London. Somebody coming the wrong way on the interstate. There's some things we can't control. You can wear your seatbelt, you can keep a lookout, but that's it. There's other things you can control that don't really matter, and we have that all the time. But there are things that we can control that do matter that we should focus on. And religiously, we know what those things are, and we'll come around to there in a few minutes. Another way to look at that, there are things that we can control. There are some things a little bit further away from our area of control that we have some influence on, and then there are some things beyond that that we can't control. So to worry about something that we can't control is frankly a waste of mental energy. Lots of folks in the Bible, lots of different stories that had concerns and had worries, and some of those we can look to for strength. When Moses led the Israelites out of captivity in Egypt, this is from Exodus chapter 17, verses 5 and 6. He provided for them. They came out of there with the clothes on their back, the jewelry and goods that the Egyptians had given to them, their livestock, and that was it. And God took care of them. He provided for them. Of course, when they crossed the Red Sea, they were in the desert and going to need food, going to need water. And I guess they had their tent material with them, so they had shelter that they would provide when they camped out each time. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go on before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Also take in your hand your rod with which you struck the river, and behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And we'll get back to the 1 Corinthians reference back to this later, but God brought water out of a rock in the desert. Who in here can do that? Anybody have control over that? Some places in the desert, even today with our modern technology, they can drill and hit water. It may be hundreds or thousands of feet down there, but they can't just magically say, hit the rock and water's going to come out. And apparently, Mike, you may want to elaborate on this. Apparently that water moved with them in some form as they traversed the wilderness for 40 years. They didn't just have that water in that one spot because they moved from there. That water would have been back there at their last campsite. And they camped for some period of time in a spot, and then they would move on again. And God would lead them. And so that water that he provided was an ongoing provision. So 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4, "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them. That rock was Christ." Even before Moses struck the rock to get water, right after they crossed the Red Sea, within a couple of days they were out of water, and where they came to, the water was undrinkable. It was bitter water. So God showed Moses how to make that water drinkable. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and then they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Now when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people complained against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When he cast it into the waters were made sweet. When I was a kid, it seemed like on all the old Westerns, there would always be an episode somewhere during that season where they were lost in the desert, or they were abandoned. They were crawling, trying to find the oasis or a creek or something for water. And these people were desperate, being 3 days without water. Sometimes when on the Westerns, they would make it to water. As soon as they took the first sip, they'd spit it back out because it would be bad water, sulfur water or poisonous or something like that. We don't have a way that I know of, where somebody could throw a tree limb into the bitter waters or the bad waters and make it pure, but God showed Moses. What did they eat for all that time? So that same rock that provided water, and the children of Israel ate manna for 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. God provides. It's Cecil and Harold and Titus on the way out to the fishing spot. So they create a pretty big wake in that boat when they're in a hurry to get out there. Who's worried? Jack?
Just a comment. I read the Bible, those stories you just mentioned, and I just kind of pass over the fact that what God really had to do to take care of that many people, and how He provided literally everything they needed. Our internet has been out for 2 days. You know, life is just not the same.
You've been blessed for 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows in my case, I'm not painting anybody else, the really trivial things that worry me and bother me, frustrate me, which are of no significance whatsoever. If I never had the internet again, as long as I live, it wouldn't change my life. And to be frustrated is an example. And then you look at those people who didn't have water, they didn't have food. I just get ashamed of myself, I guess, that I just take it for granted. And I worry about things that are ridiculous sometimes.
Human nature. God takes care of his people. You know that 40 years that they roamed in the wilderness, their shoes didn't wear out, their clothes didn't wear out. This is one of the most comfortable pairs of shoes I've ever had. They're about 3 or 4 years old. They're just starting to wear through. I can't find another pair just exactly like these, and I'm so frustrated. That's not worried. But, you know, there are little things like that. So, if you see me wearing these and the sole starts to flap loose, it's because I still like these shoes. I may take some fishing line and string them together or something like that. So many places in the scriptures where the people were outnumbered by their enemies, in dire straits, they reached out to God and God rescued them. When you think of Esther, you know, if you talk about worries, what did those Jewish people in Babylon, when the king said, you know, it's a free-for-all against the Jews on this certain day coming up. You can go kill them, take their homes, take their goods, no problem. The Jews were vastly outnumbered, and they were going to be murdered and cleaned out by the Babylonians. And, of course, you know the story of Esther and how she came through and the king allowed them to defend themselves. And, you know, situations like that where they would have been totally wiped out when they were in Egyptian captivity. You know, lots of things have a good side and a bad side. There's lots of good things about them being in Egypt, weren't there? There were 70 some when they went down there, and there were more than 1 million when they came out in that 400 years or so. So there were good things happened. The children of Israel multiplied greatly, but then they were oppressed. But then God brought them out through Moses and Aaron. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7 tells us something we should do about our worries and our cares. Casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. What would be the turn that around? What does it mean if you don't cast your worries and anxieties on God? What do you think of him if you don't?
That's where the worry sets in, carrying the load on our shoulders.
If we don't cast those anxieties on him, does that mean we don't trust in him to deliver us? Of course, our definition of deliverance might be different in different situations. You know, when we ask for things to work out the way we want them to be worked out, and not necessarily the way that God plans for us. So if we don't trust in God and cast our anxieties on him, does that mean we think he does not care for us? Because the verse says, because he cares for you.
We're just so independent and confident in our own abilities to handle it.
We have an overconfidence that we can handle it ourselves. Don't we try to raise our kids with that attitude about most things in life? We do, don't we? So maybe it's partially our fault. But there are much bigger things that we can't handle that we have to turn over to God. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 6. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? We are so blessed in this country, we don't have to worry about I have to wait before I say this. We don't have to worry about a lot of things that other people in the world do, that the military will come in today and, take your family out of the house, take you away to prison. We don't have to worry about Canada invading or rockets coming over from Canada tomorrow. There's a lot of things we don't have to worry about that people in other parts of the world do. We are so blessed because we have good roads, good infrastructure for the most part, good health care. Yet something like AIDS 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or COVID in the last couple of years can bring us back to reality on, we think we've got everything all lined out. I think there are people who predicted 20 or 30 years ago that, within a few years, there won't be any common diseases out there. We've got vaccines for measles and mumps and smallpox and polio and this and that, and they'll come up with vaccines for everything else. So pretty soon, there won't be any diseases. Everybody will live to be 150 or whatever, and there won't be any diseases. So I think AIDS back 40 years ago, and then COVID more recently, maybe is the slap that we needed to get us back to reality. And I think we can probably look into the future. Those kinds of things are going to continue to happen. When the worries of different generations are different based upon when you were and what you were doing. In my grandparents' time, in the early 1900s, they were worried about food for today and tomorrow. We got to get the crop in, or we can't make it through the winter. We can't feed the cattle this winter to make it through if we don't get everything done before cold weather comes. And those people in my grandparents' generation lived through World War I. And there was some effect there as well. In the next generation, in my parents' generation, there was the Great Depression, World War II, and entering into the Cold War. And for those of you who are my age or close to my age, you may remember what it was like to know that, Khrushchev could push the button any second. There could be thousands of nuclear weapons coming our way. We'd send him back the same in return, and we'd all kill each other. And there may not be anybody survive on the planet. Is that anything to worry about? Unfortunately, those weapons are still there. They haven't been used, thankfully. But those were some concerns. I grew up in the sticks in eastern Kentucky. We didn't practice the get under the desk nuclear drills like some people did in the cities. Did you all, Jack? It's like Ken did. Debbie was in Cincinnati during that time, and she remembers very vividly how scared they were when they would do that nuclear drill. And everybody gets under their desk. That's going to really make a difference, isn't it? Probably not. But that was the best they could do. In my generation, Vietnam was the biggest thing early on, and those of you younger have to study up on what the military draft was like. Everybody who was healthy, men were eligible for the draft at age 18, and you were drafted. And unless you had an exemption for health reasons, or early on you had an exemption for if you were in higher education, if you were in college, then they eventually dropped that as well. So lots of people went to Vietnam. Lots of people know people who did not make it back from Vietnam. This current generation, it's different. Maybe it's because of the information technology. And you've seen newsreels from the Second World War, where the news updates weren't on TV every night, they'd be on the radio. But when they would go to the movies on Saturday, there would be the newsreels of videos from recent battles that had taken place either in Europe or in the Pacific. And that's how people got a lot of their updated news other than what they heard on the radio. So today, everything is instant. You go and, when I was doing my research for this, I was looking for some pictures from Ukraine. And there were, thousands of images on there of all the destruction, the refugees, all the things that are going on. And, if you go into COVID, if you go into other areas, same thing is there. There's all this information that's available that, quite frankly, can be scary if you look at it all, or maybe what it's doing, maybe it's hardening us and the younger generation. It's all out there, that's not going to bother me. Is there anyone in here who chooses not to wear their seatbelt on purpose? We can make an argument about freedom of choice, but, there are certain things, I just picked on that one for one. There are certain things that are so proven to be helpful in almost all circumstances that it's basically insane not to follow them. And a seatbelt, to me, is one of those. Yes, there's that 0.1% of somebody who crashes and goes underwater and they can't get their seatbelt off, or their car bursts into flames and they can't get out. But then there's the other 99 point whatever percent that are saved by the seatbelt, or their injuries are greatly reduced. There are other things like that that we should make ourselves make access to. And there are other things that we have to make choices about. You're a silent group tonight. Steve, bail me out. Tell me what your concerns are about your kids.
Well, actually, you mean as a whole, just individually?
As a whole.
Okay. Just growing up, especially with the world we live in today, most I guess being social. Technology is good, don't get me wrong. But for me, technology is good for only a certain amount of time for a certain purpose. Because I think as we can see, once again, I came up in the 70s and 80s, and I was always out meeting people. They asked me all the time, "You ever meet a stranger?" No, I don't, because I figure you can find something in common with everybody. If you're trying to, you can. Say whether it's talking about somebody's shoes, the color of a shirt, you can always find common ground. I look at technology now, most of the time they're always on these phones and just doing things that's up the short. And I think that, honestly, if we don't do something about it now, sort of like you don't know. But so maybe I lose the way, and that's probably one of the biggest fears of my kids is not being socially active.
Steve's concerned about his kids being as socially active as he was in getting to know people face to face and talking to people. I don't know when that's going to show up as a weakness, whether it'll be when they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s, but that's going to come back at some point and be a negative to those kids who are growing up today. Dwight?
To say about what Mike was talking about with Calvin, and when mine was growing up, my mother always would teach us, my brothers and sisters, that no matter how bad you have it, somebody else has it worse than you do. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression about, I met a man that had complained that he had no shoes until he met a man that had no feet. And as Jack was saying, it's humbling to me when I see Stephen and Christ, when they were being killed, they were asking for forgiveness for those that had killed them. Talk about setting the standard high. That's the greatest example I can think of.
Stephen and Christ both set the standard so high. In some ways, do we elevate Stephen even a little? Christ knew what was coming. He knew where he was going, for sure. Stephen obviously did too, didn't he? Could we do that? Could we face those people who are throwing rocks at you, knowing that the next one may be the one that does you in? And you can ask God to not hold the sins against them.
A scripture comes to mind, is sort of piggybacking off this. If you look at Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, even Christ himself, he says, fear not the man that can kill the body, but not the soul. Fear him who can kill the body, and yet destroy the soul in hell. And I think that if we actually put all that we have in Christ, our belief, our trust, yeah, we can face anything. You know, we should not fear as it is. You know, it's just the way it is. But, you know, the human side of it, sometimes we might for the moment, but then when we look at the overall picture of the outcome, we should realize we have something greater regardless of who it is we're going against.
We need continual revival, continual renewing.
Of our relationship with God. When we look at something like the Lord's Supper, you know, he made that something for us to partake every week. And I think that really helps us in doing that, in remembering that sacrifice. Just like these Wednesday night classes and the other classes that we have, the more you can get together, the more you can study, the more it refreshes and enlivens our faith. When we see what other Christians are going through, like Calvin, for example, when we see what other Christians do, Jack Hall, you wouldn't know the things that Jack does. Some of you do. But the visitation, the trips, the things that he does in helping people, sure, part of that is in his elders ministry. Most of that is Jack Hall. And we should all strive to be more like Jack, not more like Mike. Not that Mike. I'm talking about Michael Jordan. Be like Mike. More like Jack. Not that Mike. Okay.
Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. So we're not talking about Jack, really. We're talking about Christ. I would like to say something about it. I'm very concerned about our nation, about the immorality, the standards of I can do whatever I want to do, basically. And you do whatever you want to do, basically. And our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, they're going to be in their prime at the time when this has had another 50 years to fester. And I really, truly am concerned about the future, knowing full well that God's in charge, knowing that in the end, of course, things are going to be exactly as God wants them. But I can't help but be fearful for especially my great-grandchildren in the world that they're going to face in their teens and, marriage and all of that. I've had opportunities to talk to some of our families who have left us. And the reasons, they won't tell you, but they beat around the bush and they say everything until they really finally get to the truth. And there are two reasons that most of these people have left that I talked to. Number one is we're boring. And number two is we don't offer any entertainment. Now, they couch entertainment in spiritual hoop-de-doo. I call it entertainment. And it's boring because you just sit here for an hour and there's nothing really to inspire us. Well, that attitude is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse as time goes on. And I'm troubled by it. I'm frightened by it. I pray about it all the time. Really nothing I can do about it, except in my spirit. But anyway, that's enough.
I'm sure we all think sometimes about, couldn't we all just go away to somewhere and have an isolated community of Christians? But yet, we're supposed to be in this world to help save the world. Lisa?
I really like the island concept, that self-regulated, but that's not reality. And one of the things that I catch myself worrying about is, did Brett and I prepare our children and teach our children well enough? And that's a waste of time because to some degree that time has passed. We still have some influence, I hope, on our children. And on their time raising their children now. So I feel like I'm better, I'm gonna say this, I know this isn't right either, but I'm better served to worry about things that are happening now. You know, I look at the Israelites and I criticize them for their lack of faith, because they had all these times when God showed that he was taking care of them, sometimes to really drastic degrees. You know, if you think about Joseph and his life from the time that he was put into that well until the time that he helped save his whole nation from starvation, that was God's plan. God planned that all along, all those years ahead of time, so that all of that could be fulfilled. And I think, you know, why those Israelites, why didn't they see that? You know, why did they immediately turn around and start complaining and worrying again about, you know, well, where's our food? Where are we going to get food from? Where are we going to get something to drink? But yet I find myself doing the exact same thing. I worry about stuff. I pray about it. God proves to me that he's caring for me, sometimes by finding solutions that I could have never dreamt up myself, that are much better suited for me than I would have ever thought, but yet I turn right back around and I find something else to worry about. And so it is a constant struggle with me. You ask Fred, and I tell you, he will tell you that that is something that I constantly struggle with, is worry. His safety, our kids' safety, the future, the economy, gas prices, our budget, I mean, you name it, and I'll worry about it. You know, the thing now, Sunday, that's gonna fall on my head. You know, there are times when I think of things that I start worrying and start really obsessing about things that I know wouldn't even happen. And I just have to take a step back, and I think that's why one of my favorite scriptures is Psalm 46:10, where the Psalm says, "Be still and know that I am Lord," because that has slapped me in the face more times than not.
I won't read Matthew chapter 6, but everybody knows that scripture, Matthew chapter 6, beginning in 25 through the end of the chapter, about the lilies of the field, that God knows our needs. He takes care of the lilies and the birds. He knows our needs. He knows what we need for food, for clothing, what we need to survive. He'll take care of us. You know, the Old Testament was written for our knowledge and understanding, that we can have a better background of things that have gone on throughout time. And I can't help but to read through, especially the sequences of the kings. You know, once the northern kingdom went off, they stayed off. You know, they had not so bad kings and worse kings, but they never had a good king. The Judah and Benjamin, the southern kingdom, they had some decent kings off and on, but they just kind of gradually went into that spiral. And is that what our country is doing now? Are we 10 years away from being carried away into Babylonian captivity? Think about that. You know, using that Babylonian captivity in whatever fashion you want. I'll leave you with that. Any other comments? Thank you.